Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is our great pleasure to welcome back to our lecture theater Dr. Samir Mahmoud, who last year entertained us with a most thought-provoking lecture on how and why non-figurative art emotionally moves us. Dr. Samir Mahmoud is an assistant professor of architectural history and theory at the Lebanese American University and is also director of the Mediterranean Cultural Academy, an unusual study and travel academy promoting academic and cultural travel in the Arab world. Tonight, Dr. Samir's talk is on our living Turath, thinking with the Islamic tradition about contemporary challenges, and draws a wide range of Islamic thinkers. This talk will attempt to answer some of these questions, demonstrating in the process of extraordinary relevance of the Islamic tradition. Please switch off your mobile phones and welcome Dr. Samir Mahmoud.
Thank you very much. I'm using my phone only as a stopwatch, so I can keep track of time. I have a tendency of talking too much. I apologize for the change of title. You may have noticed the title read out and the title on the board is a bit different from my titles, and my papers are always in constant flux. But the substance of the paper is quite the same. The relevance of the Islamic tradition for our everyday lives, living well. And I love this picture. It's just off the coast of Whitehaven Beach in Australia. And it really has that soothing, calming kind of quality about it. The issue that I want to deal with here is, and the issue that I have, is really something that came up several years ago when I was still a student at Cambridge, an altercation, if you will, or a heated debate with an academic. I think we were talking about Ibn Hazm at the time, and after a few hours of scholarly debate and discussion, I happened to mention a certain reading of Ibn Hazm, relating it to Jungian psychology in the 20th century, and he lost his mind, insisting that Ibn Hazm and many of these thinkers are a thing of the past and have absolutely nothing to tell us today. And it really got me thinking, because my interest in the Islamic tradition, or Islamic Turath, was really out of an existential personal interest for discovering its relevance for not only dealing with contemporary philosophical, psychological problems, but really also existential ones too. And so my issue with the kind of archaeological or museum approach to Islamic thought is it tends to box things into certain kind of categories and place them as objects in museums, or frame them with an archaeological perspective as if they're just a thing of the past. I've always approached the Islamic tradition in a very different light. Rather than think about the Islamic tradition, I've always had the tendency to think with the Islamic tradition about the existential, philosophical, social, spiritual problems facing the world in general and the Muslim world in particular. And there lies my interest in this tradition itself, in order to live its wisdom and live well. I love the Rodin kind of sculpture, a man or a woman in deep thought about these issues. Now, why this is absolutely necessary now and today is because we're in a profound need to breathe new life into this tradition, really. Give people access to it. The wisdom of the tradition needs to be delivered in response to the thinking processes and problems people are facing today. Otherwise, it faces becoming a stagnant body of water that only festers with a lot of issues and problems. Also, really major issue that I'm concerned with at the level of today's youth is, unless we address this issue urgently, we risk losing our youth either to a secular atheistic extremism or its opposite, the flip side of the same coin, a certain kind of religious extremism. And I think these two approach the tradition sometimes in the same way, by ossifying it, boxing it into some kind of an essentialized thing and saying this is what tradition is. You can't really think outside those categories. Secularists do it to criticize religion, and certain religious extremists do it in order to kind of narrow down its vision into a singular kind of ideological framework for confronting the the problems and challenges of living in the 21st century. We need to heal. I love this image of a Native American from South America, a story told by a professor of mine when I was an undergraduate student in anthropology in Australia, where he had to cut an interview short so he could go and pray for mankind to heal. And the shaman had to go and pray so that the sun could still rise the next day. It may sound a bit superstitious to many of us, but the idea that what we do has implications at a cosmic level and a cosmic scale, and the fact that the earth is suffering largely because of the fact that we are suffering, and vice versa, is really a really important notion indeed. And I think the Islamic tradition has a lot. It's a living, breathing, pulsating tradition that can heal us and contribute much to humanity, not only to the Muslim community, but to humanity at large. And so the living Turath, the notion, the reason why I'm proposing the notion of living Turath is because living refers to the contemporary relevance of the Islamic tradition for confronting the problems that we've just spoken about. It's not a question of thinking about it, it's a question of thinking with it about our contemporary issues. And I love this quote from Heraclitus, that the Turath is the same river, but not the same river at the same time. It's constantly nourished by new water, but at the same time, it is the same tradition. Living also means that Turath can engage in a living dialogue with the present. Not only can it, but it must. And that it lives on in our lives. And I'm a big advocate of the idea that philosophy is really practical philosophy. The idea that philosophy isn't just an abstract discipline, as Islamic philosophy is often taught in many departments. It's actually a practice, a living practice that can engage with our daily lives. I love the Indian symbol of knowledge, the banyan tree. It's all over AUB campus where I used to teach. And it's a symbol of knowledge, really, the Protestant brought with them from India to Beirut. But I love the idea of how it can shoot its roots in different places and rejuvenate, even when the core trunk is somehow dying. So the objective would be to integrate the living wisdom of the traditional Islamic and non-Islamic sources with contemporary psychology, ethics, and philosophy, and apply it to everyday life. The reason why I insist on everyday life is the audience of this initiative, or this framework, or this approach really is you and I, all of us really. Everyday Muslims, non-Muslims, educated people who are looking for guidance to deal with their everyday concerns and problems. It's not a substitute for the big philosophical projects that are happening at great universities, and we're in the presence of eminent scholars here who are working on remarkable projects at various places. It's rather a bridge between the world of academia, where a lot of this knowledge is stored and archived, and the everyday lives of people across the globe, or everyday lives of Muslims who really need to tap into this wisdom. Everyday life. I believe this is somewhere in Kuwait, if I'm not mistaken. I searched for it, so I put in Kuwait, so it should be Kuwait. But the living Turath here is not really an Islamic discipline per se. I don't like the term Islamic a lot because prior to the 19th century, it didn't really exist. Knowledge was knowledge. It was considered knowledge wherever it came from and wherever it went and was found. But traditional Islamic knowledge, disciplines like fiqh, law, kalam, theology, philosophy, mysticism, natural sciences, non-Islamic, and I say that between parentheses in reference to Greek, Roman, Christian, Zoroastrian, Indian, Chinese, Buddhist thought, and contemporary disciplines from psychology all the way down to art and aesthetics. Another way of visualizing what I'm talking about is the living Turath really includes all these three elements as one. It's neither one nor the other, and many working in the field have a tendency of isolating Islamic disciplines into certain categories and calling these Islamic as opposed to others. If you look at the venture of Islam in its early history, there wasn't this kind of discrimination in the sense that we're going to discriminate between what we consider purely Islamic or non-Islamic. Wisdom from all sources was embraced with a confidence that is unrivaled really in history. Or another way of visualizing it is to look at in terms of concentric circles, where the relationship between, at the heart would be the Quran, of course, and its sensibility, and all these other disciplines all around it. The challenges are quite immense, and it's these challenges that I want to address in this presentation. The first is to provide access to the Islamic Turath or tradition. The problem is its jargon is quite difficult, and it addresses entirely different problems. One of the major challenges is how do we even begin to understand what on earth they were talking about? The jargon is quite, or the terminology is quite difficult, it's quite technical, and they're addressing a wide range of issues that don't seem to be immediately relevant to what we're dealing with today. The second challenge is to discern its relevance for our contemporary existential problems, or contemporary philosophical problems, or our contemporary environmental problems. And so when you pick up a text like this and you flip through its pages, it's very difficult to imagine how that is relevant. The third challenge is to engage the Islamic tradition in a living dialogue with contemporary bodies of knowledge, then to disseminate that in simple and accessible English or other languages, Arabic, through a lively and engaging format or platform. These are the 5 challenges that I think we face today when we decide to start bridging this tradition, or bridging between this tradition and our contemporary lives. And so what I'm about to show you is really a hypothetical project, if you will. I've come up with it in the past year or so, but I've been articulating it in this way. It could be realized one day, I don't know, but it's an experiment. And it really revolves around 4 different kind of pillars. What I call the Academy for Living Well, the Living With series, Think With, About, and Present to the Divine. What do I mean by the Academy for Living Well? Of course, it's not necessarily a physical academy. It could be a virtual academy. You log online and you're an educated person, and you really want to become, really want to learn more about how this body of wisdom and knowledge is extremely relevant to your lives. And you decide to enroll. Welcome to the Academy for Living Well. And you sign up for morning sessions that revolves around the theme of the good life. And you start with a video animation or a lecture or a discussion on Avicenna on a healthy diet. So the presenter or the animation is really engaging your bodily nutrition. You move on to discussing Al-Kindi and Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya on dealing with issues of sadness and happiness in our lives. And then you move on to Qadi al-Ba'albaki on Mufarrihat al-Nafs. It's a wonderful text that I dug up and found on what are those things that bring joy and happiness to the soul. There's a flourishing body of literature in Arabic and Persian that deals specifically with this issue. What are the things that make us happy? We think happiness is a recent topic, but ever since the notion of happiness was discussed in early thought in the Quran and then appropriated in Greek philosophy under the term of eudaimonia, or prosperity, or flourishing, human flourishing, happiness, Sa'adah has been discussed in philosophical texts from Al-Kindi onwards. But then by the 11th, 12th century, when this text was written, it has some interesting nuggets of wisdom. You can explore the alchemy of happiness, whether it's Ghazali's text or whether it's Ibn Arabi's text, or really go through a series of short talks and lectures from Socrates to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a contemporary school in psychology, via the writings of Al-Ghazali, and end your morning session with a musical therapy, Al-Farabi, and neuroscience on musical therapy. Now, they are related. I'm not really bringing 2 subjects that are unrelated together. I've done a bit of research on the background of these subjects that are extremely relevant for us today. You move on to the late morning session dealing with issues of doubt and certainty. We all deal with doubt and certainty in our lives. Socrates and the art of questioning. The Socratic method was often appropriated within many philosophical texts in Arabic, and Socrates was seen as the kind of virtuous man who did engage in this kind of good art of questioning. We can move on also and learn a lot of lessons in the next session on Ghazali and the art of doubting, and his life and the periods of doubt that he went through. I'll explain that a little bit later, because often people think he doubted the existence of God, but it's a different kind of doubt altogether. And we move on to the kind of knowledge offered by Suhrawardi, in which he argues that knowledge really, kind of experiential knowledge that offers certainty, is a presential kind of knowledge that presupposes something entirely different from what the other philosophers were talking about. And you end that morning session with experiential knowledge, going from Plotinus to Ghazali and Pierre Hadot on the notion of practical philosophy and how really the real kind of knowledge that offers certainty is one that is experienced and lived. Then you move on to your early afternoon sessions, the life of virtue and relationships, moving through Aristotle and Miskawayh on character building, the importance of building character and virtue, Epictetus and Al-Kindi and the art of maintaining control. How is it that we can master ourselves in such a way that we're no longer influenced or no longer respond to the external world like we're being played like a piano, but rather we exercise a certain mastery over our emotional reactions to the world through a certain kind of practice and training. And then we move on to a session on Plato, Avicenna, Ibn Arabi, and Ibn al-Qayyim on love. One of the most remarkable traditions that offers literature on love in its various types and kinds is the Islamic tradition. Al-Ghazali and Suyuti, practical advice on marriage. And then we move on to Aristotle, Avicenna, and Alistair MacIntyre, who is a philosopher living in the States today, on virtue ethics. And MacIntyre is really reviving the contemporary discourse on virtue ethics in Aristotle, Aquinas, and to a certain lesser extent, Avicenna. Although Avicenna's virtue ethics isn't really being discussed in the same kind of contemporary relevance that MacIntyre is offering Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. Hence the need to really do that. In the late afternoon session, politics and justice, all afternoon sessions around tea and coffee in the Middle East always revolve around politics. Plato and Farabi and the necessity of justice. Ibn Tufayl and the art of free thinking. Ibn Tufayl's Hayy ibn Yaqzan offers a lot to our contemporary need to really think about what it means to be free from external and internal compulsions. Sir al-Asrar, justice within, justice without. And we end with a late afternoon session on Aristotle, Avicenna, and Michael Sandel on politics. He's a wonderful Aristotelian philosopher who works on political philosophy in the States. I highly recommend you attend or watch his course on justice. It's offered by Harvard online. And then early evening session, Know Thyself, Socrates, Plato on the art of knowing oneself, Al-Muhasibi, Al-Harith Al-Muhasibi on the art of self-accounting, Muhasabatun Nafs, Ibn Arabi on the art of mindfulness, Muraqabah. The Islamic tradition developed a remarkable tradition and practices on observing oneself as if from a distance, to act as an observer to oneself and monitor what happens and what occurs in one's mind in order to master that self. And later on, I'll show you examples of how they used to practice this through journal writing. At the end of the day, you write down a journal of not just the things that you've done during the day, but the things that you thought in order that you can take yourself into account and to observe muraqabatun nafs, to exercise a sense of and then Ghazali and Carl Jung, 20th century psychologists, on the art of confronting our darker side. We all have one. We often avoid confronting it. And I think Ghazali and Jung have a lot to offer in dialogue on that issue. The late evening session, of course, would end with the contemplative life. Ghazali on the secrets of worship and remembrance, the art of being present to the divine. Najmuddin Kubra and Goethe on contemplating nature and color. It's something I've been working on for the past few years. They have a remarkable convergence, these two individuals or these two characters, on the notion of contemplation and especially on color. So every week you would log on, if you will, or every once a month, and this curriculum would change. Right? And so you go through a curriculum that's really addressing issues. I suppose the titles could be changed to make them more relevant, you know. Ghazali on divorce. How do you go through a divorce and deal with the issues of divorce or anxiety? Ghazali on how to deal with static anxiety of losing your job or not being fulfilled by your job. That's exactly what Ghazali was confronting in Baghdad, in Nizamiyyah. And these are some academies that are doing this within the context of the Western tradition, of course, like the Idler Academy, whose premises I don't really agree with, the Epicureans, materialist. But they're offering a model that's quite interesting and that I think that's very useful. They offer introductory courses to ancient philosophy on how it can transform your life, pre-Socratics, Plato, the Cynics, and the Skeptics, or Udemy, online courses on how Stoic philosophy can transform your life today. Alas, unfortunately, there's absolutely nothing like that in regards to Islamic philosophy, for example, like this, or Islamic psychology, or Sufism, or mysticism. The second kind of approach one could take is living with series, and I particularly like this one. Living with series is living with, you take one individual figure, Ghazali or Ibn Sina, Ibn Hazm, Ibn Arabi, and the living with series would really address, well, how can we live a day or two or a week in the life and teachings of any one of these particular authors? And it would be written or addressed in such a way that really directly addresses what we're dealing with, what we're handling, rather than a biographical text. He lived here and he did this and he spoke about this and he spoke about that, but rather really living engagement with these authors. A number of documentaries have been done on Ghazali, for example, but about his life, but rarely have they actually covered something along the lines of what I'm proposing here. Living Turath offers experiential ways to incorporate the wisdom of the Islamic tradition in our everyday lives. The Living With series takes a great Muslim thinker and highlights those ideas that are most relevant to our everyday lives today. And the point of this book would be not to present all of Ghazali's system, but to highlight a few key ideas that can really help us through our day or our week, our month, and through our lives. A table of contents on Ghazali would look something like this, perhaps. Is your job fulfilling? Ghazali has a lot to say about that. He dealt with a lot of issues of doubt concerning his position as a top professor in the Nizamiyyah in Baghdad, but confronted with the highest status in academia, he wasn't really satisfied with what he was doing. He dealt with a lot of issues of doubt about the inability of reason or the inability of these kind of worldly achievements to really achieve the kind of certainty that he was aspiring with. And he began examining the life that's worth living, really, in this world. And his Munkaz bin al-Dalal is really partly an examination, almost Socratic, if you like. The life not examined is not worth living. And then he began exploring, cultivating the wisdom of the heart as a means towards coming to the presence of the divine, which achieves the highest kind of happiness, sahada, according to Ghazali, within this Islamic framework, and the kind of experiential certainty that leads one to deep convictions. And really, this kind of journey through Ghazali's life will spare us these kind of statements that I find quite problematic. The problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubts, while the stupid ones are full of confidence. And that is very applicable today in certain contexts, it is. But I'm tired really of hearing philosophers and scholars often say, the best kind of scholars and philosophers are the ones who are constantly in doubt. No, the Islamic tradition offers something entirely different. I think the life of Ghazali offers something a little bit different than a state of perpetual doubt where we're not able to do anything or decide on anything because we're constantly paralyzed by uncertainty and doubt. And the School of Life, for example, in London, it's another example of an academy that's really doing this within the context of the Western tradition, offers a series on Western thinkers from Bergson to Byron all the way to Nietzsche. And my hope is to see something quite similar, life lessons from great thinkers, Ghazali, Al-Kindi, Ibn Rushd, written in very accessible English, small chapters. You can put it in your back pocket. I see people in London reading this on the train on the way to work. Quite remarkable, in fact. The thinking with about is another approach, really, to this body of knowledge, if you will. It's really taking a single author and thinking with that particular author about a particular issue or subject. And the point of departure would be our particular problem, our particular issue. So if we're dealing with the issue of freedom today, can we think with Ibn Tufayl about the notion of freedom? Or can we think with any other of the other authors about Ibn Arabi, for example? What does he have to say to us today in the 21st century about dealing with the bewildering diversity of religions and perspectives today? In my own research, for example, I really specialize in Ibn Arabi, and he has a lot to offer on the question of a theology of compassion and pluralism. He has a lot to offer on postmodern philosophy and some of the themes that come up in that tradition. He has a lot to offer on the issue of aesthetics and issue of love. And I think the first time I was here, I kind of really superficially touched on the issue of Ibn Arabi and aesthetics. It's a huge project that I'm working on. There's a lot more to say. Maybe in the future I can say more about it. But he has a lot to offer on this question of aesthetics. Maybe we can think with multiple authors about a single topic, thinking with Ghazali and Ibn Arabi about knowledge today, or thinking with Al-Kindi about happiness, in other words, thinking about happiness with Al-Kindi. You log on, you have this wonderful 60-second or 3-minute video animation, happiness is, or how do we dispel sorrow. Al-Kindi has a wonderful treatise on this issue of dispelling sorrow from our lives and increasing our sense of joy and happiness, or surur. And the reason why I chose this topic is because I've been dealing with it lately with a lot of my friends. They're just unhappy. A lot of the people I know are just unhappy with their lives. And, you know, to a certain extent, including myself, we're all in the same boat. And I found my reading of Al-Kindi quite helpful and very useful. And so I summarized it for a friend of mine who was able to read it in a dialogue form. I'm not going to present you with a dialogue form. It's very long. It's quite long. But I'll present you with a summary of what Al-Kindi has to offer on this issue in the convoluted language that he discusses it in. So, for example, what is sorrow? What causes it? Well, happiness, or joy, surur, according to Al-Kindi, is the absence of sorrow. But sorrow is a psychological pain, alam nafsani. It results from the loss of something desired or its lack of fulfillment. Or it results from the loss of something we love. Its root, therefore, is desire, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that has to be guided and tempered. And I find this really, really interesting, especially this one here. Pain results from the loss of something desired or its lack of fulfillment. Because in the age that we live in today, in an age in which we have bucket lists of desires to fulfill before we die, in an age in which marketing machines are able to conjure up all manner of different kind of desires that, and work on the subconscious level, our subconscious level, to make us think that we need or want certain things. In an age like that, I think the sobering practices of Al-Kindi, of self-mastery in the face of this barrage and attack from the outside and the inside, is very useful. We suffer this problem, we fall into this gap, as it were. We desire many things, many things. And 20th century psychology is intimately linked to psychoanalysis and the attempt to anchor marketing of products in subconscious needs. It's very sinister in many ways. I call it the science of waswas. That's what it really does, or the science of inception. It whispers in your ears that you need certain things. Or, have you seen the movie Inception? We've probably all seen it. It really puts an idea and allows it to grow, and you think it's yours. We think we're free. We want it. We want this thing. We need it. We want to acquire it. But in fact, Al-Kindi tells us, hang on a minute. Let's take a step back and let's really, really burrow deep and find out where it's really coming from. We desire many things. Often they are imposed from outside, and that is very true. A lot of the things we think we want, we don't need, but they're often imposed from the outside, or in the age that we live in today, in a very sinister manner, inserted from within, and they grow as if they're kind of our indigenous, authentic ideas. We can never really fulfill every desire, Al-Kindi says. So a gap arises between what we desire and what we can attain of it. We also fall into the other trap. I found this picture online, but we love many things and people, they are external to us, Al-Kindi says. We can never keep everything or everyone we love. After all, everything perishes, right? And so he's taking us through what we'll see in a minute is kind of a cognitive framework of really shifting the way we think about things. He's not saying it's bad to love, but let's look at the things that we love. Right? They're external to us. We can never really keep them. They will perish. And so it's best that we prepare ourselves for those moments. And we'll see how in a minute. And so he gives the analogy of a sea voyage analogy in which a ship anchors off an island. Okay, the ship is analogous to our journey through this life, as it were. There's another example from a hadith, I believe. There's a caravan of camels that stop at an oasis on their way to their destination. So your destination, your final destination is the afterlife, but you stop in an oasis briefly, and you start maybe for 2-3 days. In those 2-3 days, you decide to build an elaborate tent or mud brick house, which you're going to leave behind in 2 days anyway. So he begins to categorize the absurdity of our attempts, our feeble attempts to really attach ourselves to things that inevitably we will lose. And so he wonders often in the text, can we perhaps desire and love, or attach our love and our desire to the imperishable things, things that last forever, the things that last forever. And what we need to do really, and this is a kind of a Quranic imperative really, we have to accept things as they really are. And I think the prophetic dua, Allahumma arina al-ashya'a kama hiya, show us things as they really are. In one sense, in one meaning, it really addresses this issue. How are things as they are, not how we want them to be? If the things of this world are perishable, then it is pointless to exclusively desire or love them. And so he provides opportunities, and he provides these wonderful exercises in his text on how we can meditate and contemplate on things long gone. And this literature on ruins, if you will, or the literature on things lost, really pops up again and again in the text about, and other literature on contemplating things that ultimately the real state of things is that they are in constant flux and they would never last. In fact, they are on loan to us from the divine and they will be taken back. And so why are we surprised when the one who's given us this loan takes it back? Right? And what's interesting about Al-Kindi's take on this is, although explicitly in this particular text he doesn't refer to Quranic vocabulary or Quranic verses, he nonetheless is really, it really is a Quranic approach to really thinking, really reflecting on this question of how things are impermanent and how can we exercise a certain self-mastery and not allow the fact that they will pass away affect us in the manner that they do. Even the evil in the world and the suffering are part of it, they are necessary. And so in a typical Stoic fashion, and of course Al-Kindi is influenced by Stoic philosophy, the Greek school of thought, we have to accept it with equanimity. We have to accept it. We have to change the way we think about things and feel about the world. So Al-Kindi's theory of emotion is very cognitive, very similar to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a school of thought today that really emphasizes the idea that a lot of our emotional turbulence that we live in our lives is really a matter of perspective. If we really change the way we see things, that emotion will wash away. So it's a matter of perspective and changing the way we look at things. You're driving down the road and someone beeps you and you react by calling him names and he's swearing out the window and whatnot. Well, that's a life lived where you're really like a puppet being played by other people. But if you respond, if you change your perspective and say, wow, this is an opportunity for me to really exercise my sense of patience, or this is my opportunity to exercise my ability to understand that perhaps maybe, or empathize, this person had a really bad morning. That change of perspective really washes away that sense of anger that one had earlier. It's very Stoic. All we need is a change of perspective, but that's not really enough. We need to change the way we are in the world also. And this is where Al-Kindi becomes extremely, extremely helpful. He says, what we love and desire, especially what we desire, is often a social or cultural construct, which means we can choose to change the things we desire or the way we desire them. It's a matter of convention acquired through habituation. We grow up in societies that tell us, you need this and you need that, you need to have this and you have to have this, and your status is this, and your tribe will think this of you, and your parents will think that of you, and etc., etc. You have to acquire this particular object, you have to acquire this particular status. If we cultivate good habits, we can experience a lot more joy. So he's opening up on a possibility that given the right kind of choice that we make, we can change the source of sorrow by completely eliminating it. Ultimately, a transformation of perspective must become a transformation of the self. And I love a quote by Plotinus in one of his Enneads in which he describes the cultivation of the self as a perpetual sculpting of one's own self, which was, this is really beautifully expressed in the sculpture by Bobby Carlyle, Self-Made Man, where you're really sculpting and constantly perfecting your character and yourself. The path is tough but rewarding. In the same way that we put up with physical pain, we can put up with the psychological pain or a cure for the psyche. We need steadfastness, azm along this path. And he towards the end of his treatise on this subject, he really called us back to ourselves. We really have to know ourself. What is ourself? We have to know what it is in order to be able to exercise control and not respond to the world in a haphazard manner. We cannot desire that which does not and cannot exist. It's pointless to desire things that can't happen. It's pointless to desire something we can never attain. We can never attain to all things we desire, so it's pointless to desire them all. And he offers what I call the therapeutic toolkit. I imagine this one here being like an app on your computer or your phone where you tap in and you open up your therapeutic toolkit, and he offers a number of exercises, daily meditations or exercises. Go to the bottom of things, penetrating into them and exposing their true nature. What is fashion? I gave this example because it came up recently in a conversation with a friend. Fashion is this wonderful status symbol. Fashion is this a whole huge industry associated with different kind of names and branding, etc. Essentially, what is it really? It's a cloth that's dyed in a certain color to cover your body. And this kind of constant mental exercise of really getting to the bottom of things will help you really peel away all those accretions that are imposed on it. What is a painting? I mean, once you peel away all the social marketing and art market speculation and status symbol associated with painting, you discover that no painting is really worth $200 million or $300 million. It's absurd. And so you really peel away at these absurdities to get back to the essence of something. A therapeutic toolkit 2, meditate on things that have saddened you or others and compare them to your current state. If you think about, if you just lost a father or a loved one, he would say, look at the person next to you. That person lost their loved one last year. They're very happy today. They're enjoying life. So you meditate on the loss of others to see that it's only a temporary state that you're going through and that you'll soon overcome it quite easily. It's only, or a state in which you've lost something before and you're able to overcome it. There is no need for the emissary in this collection to be to our liking in form or character, or that the time be what we might prefer. In the sense that things are given to us on loan, and we don't choose the time it's taken away from us. And really visualizing or contemplating the moments, one of the exercises is think ahead about the moment in which your father or parent will die. Think about the moment in which you will lose your job. Think about the moment. And once you prepare yourself and detach yourself from that, you become a master of yourself, that when it actually happens, it happens with a certain sense of peace and acceptance. You can't really run away from it. So what's the point? And there are many, many others. There are many, many others. And this wonderful thing here, it really invokes the Quran in the Ma'al Usri Yusra, that there is this notion that with every hardship there is ease. But not only that, every hardship is also an ease. Every hardship is also an ease. Losing an opportunity or a job is really an opportunity for you to grow and strengthen your moral character. We often see loss and suffering as an inevitable or a bad thing, a part of the world. In fact, the suffering itself sometimes is a yusr, in the sense that the suffering is the only way in which you can grow and refine your soul and character. And so welcome it. And it's a very difficult thing to do. We don't welcome suffering. We don't welcome loss. The only way you're going to become compassionate is when you exercise compassion at a moment when you must, when there's maybe your sense of immediate instinct is for revenge. It's very easy to exercise compassion where there's no opportunity to exercise it. You say, I'm a compassionate person, but I've never really exercised it. There's no point. So every hardship is an opportunity for ease, and after every hardship there is ease. And so that person who really hit your car in the morning or swore at you at work or whatever it is, it's an opportunity for you to exercise. That's the opportunity. That's the ease. That's the God-given chance for you to really grow. And if you look at it that way, if you shift your perspective, you're no longer angry with the person. You're actually very happy with the person. You welcome it. You don't invite him to swear at you again, but you welcome that opportunity that has arisen. And again, it's quite cognitive. Al-Kindi is really adamant. It's this shift in our mental perspective on these issues that really changes the way we feel about them. And if you do these in small doses or small steps, they will snowball. and become a way of life. And then you have habituated yourself to certain practices that will constantly bring you joy and avoid sorrow. Conclusion, loss is a necessity, sorrow is optional. It's really up to you. It's how you respond to loss. If you respond to loss in the way that he's criticizing, then you will fall into sorrow. Another way of putting it is, loss is inevitable, but sorrow isn't. A happy life is a matter of the right choices. And there we are, very happy. But I've just mentioned Al-Kindi very quickly in one of his small treatises, and I've only summarized it very quickly just to give you a flavor for the kind of relevance it has. But one can really summarize, bring into the mix Ghazali, Ibn Sina, Ibn al-Qayyim, Ibn Rushd al-Farabi, the Razis, various other authors to think about happiness, or even Seneca and Epictetus, and even Schopenhauer and Nietzsche into the mix, and really come up with a wonderful video, a wonderful publication on this issue of happiness and how we can deal with it on our daily lives. Instead of just Al-Kindi, you can draw on the wisdom of all these various authors to deal with it. The last one I want to touch on before I stop is presence to the divine. It's a project I'm working on right now, and I think it's really, really important because everything I've mentioned earlier is about living and about thinking, but this one is really about worship. Muslims worship salat, fasting, almsgiving, pilgrimage. I want to focus on ritual prayer, really, and how the huge implications it has for our daily lives. We often think the ritual prayer is a burden. You get up, you do your movements, and you at a specific time, and then you just leave. It's a burden. You do it because you have to do it, right? But my research has shown its implications are huge. I'm not going to summarize them very quickly here. Very quickly, I'm going to summarize them. But the ritual prayer was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam during his Isra al-Mi'raj. كَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى, within 2 bells length of the divine presence, in which he was gifted the prayer. And then when he comes down, Jibreel alayhi salam teaches him the prayer, and he teaches this to his ummah. According to one of the hadiths, Salat Mi'raj al-Mu'min, which means that the ritual prayer is really our equivalent to the Isra al-Mi'raj. It's basically our means of ascending to the divine presence, or coming into the divine presence. Now, of course, the Quran is constantly talking about how the divine is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It is we who are veiled from the divine presence. And so the ritual prayer is really a means of, is presence. Ghazali and many other scholars insist, as-salat hudur al-qalb. Hudur al-qalb in what? In the present moment to the divine presence. That's what the prayer really is. It's nothing else but a means of being present in the present moment to the divine presence. And how is that? Very quickly to summarize, from the moment we perform our intention and the moment in which our action flows through our body and through the divine words that we recite that are divinely revealed, we engage in a very creative act in which the divine makes itself present. In the literature they call it istihdar, al-hadra al-ilahiyyah, or making the divine present. Not in the sense that you make the divine presence, but in the sense that you remove the veils of your absence from God and become perpetually present only to the divine. And if we look at the literature and the way it's discussed, you'll find that one of the most extensive discussions of being mindful of your mind, of being mindful of the thought processes that go through your mind, are discussed in the context of salat. If salat or prayer is a mode of being present to the divine, it means completely being absent from the rest of the world. And absence from the rest of the world, it means you are plucked out of that rushing, accelerating time that we are always running away from in life, in which you're plucked into a different notion, different rhythm of time, a higher order of time in which you are in a relationship to the cosmos itself and the divine. And so the literature on how to pluck yourself out of that everyday maelstrom, that storm, and really bring yourself to a center of stillness is discussed in this literature. And I was surprised growing up, learning how to pray. No one even taught me any of this. It's there in the literature. It's very, very relevant today in an age in which we are increasingly alienated from the rhythms of nature, prayer follows a particular rhythm of the sun in its timing and in its movements. And so through the basic thought, khawatir, that come through passing our mind, and how to exercise mastery over them, and our intention to be present, that carries over into a body, an orientation, a fixation of the eye, and postures and movements that also inculcate the same degree of presence in our body, to the effect of the recitation of the sacred word and hearing the recitation, listening and understanding their meaning. Eventually the divine image arises. And in the Islamic tradition, this is the quintessential paradigm of how to be present to the divine. We have a practice here in the Islamic tradition that really speaks to our alienated selves today, whether it's alienated from nature, alienated from the divine, or alienated from ourselves. And in some of the courses that I offer on this particular subject, we really engage in interesting exercises in which this practice here helps us really be present or mindful in our everyday lives. How can we exercise niyyah and the sense of self-mastery in our everyday lives? How can we use the tools and tool set here that we learn in prayer to being present in our bodies in our everyday lives? How can the recitation of the sacred texts really make us present to the divine in our every moment, until the divine image arises within us at every instant? In the literature you find this wonderful expression, those ahl-hudur, ad-da'im, are the ones who are both present in prayer and outside the prayer in the same way. They're perpetually present to the divine in everything they do. And what I find so interesting about this is the extensive discussion on the body. The reason why I find this interesting is because a lot of spiritual traditions seem to denigrate the body as secondary or not really of vital importance. But the Islamic tradition bases its entire spirituality on the body. The body carries forth the first burdens of any spiritual life. And so you get this process in which prayer becomes a daily meditation and a practice that really enriches every aspect of our lives if performed properly. And unfortunately, many of us, including myself, don't really perform it properly and haven't learned it in this particular way. There are many other aspects of prayer that are quite surprising that I found in my research, for example. It helps us better understand the relationship between our ego, our lower self, and the relationship to our higher self. How to be more present in our bodies and postures, how to live in the moment, the significance of our breath for our spiritual well-being. It also, the relation between our inner world and outer world around us, how to better appreciate nature and the natural elements, especially water. I love it when I start talking about water and the element of water in purification. The wonderful discussions of the sacred quality of water and what it does when it washes over our body. Very beautiful discussion. The relationship between our rational faculty and our heart, how to harness our capacity to listen and hear beyond just words, but the silence itself. How to harness our capacity to see beyond the visible, to tread the earth lightly. The nature of human creativity, art, and imagination, and how to harness them properly in the path of God. You might think, what on earth does prayer have to do with that? It has everything to do with it. The Islamic prayer is our means of drawing our icon. The image of the divine that wells up in prayer is our equivalent to something like this. And later on, perhaps I can discuss why in the Islamic tradition there are discussions on why we can't do this, but why in prayer it is actually permissible. It has huge implications for how to be more compassionate, how to relate to other faiths, how to be less anxious, less depressed, and less stressed. And of course, this is a hypothetical format in which this knowledge can be disseminated. Again, how to share the knowledge very quickly. And this touches on the fifth challenge that we have, which is how do we offer it to the youth. An online platform, bookstore, cafe, lecture board room, therapy, discussion space, pop-up academies. Pop-up academy is not a fixed academy, but something that pops up in every city offering various courses. Like a website like this, let's call it the Living Turath Initiative, or bookstore, cafe, lecture board room, and therapy discussion space. Okay, this is an actual cafe in London. I've just overlaid it with the Living Turath Academy. It's hypothetical. Please don't go and try to find it in London. It doesn't exist. And a pop-up academy with workshops, or lecture courses and retreats. And the Living Turath app. Now, there was supposed to be an audio here with trickling water in the background to get that kind of effect, but it wasn't working for some reason. But you click on this app and you really, you're feeling depressed, or you're feeling you just had a breakup. You go into your app and really you find at your fingertips therapeutic toolkits derived from this wonderful tradition. That's all I really have to want to say. This is a conceptual idea of what it could become. I don't know, publishing house, an academy, cafe, bookstore, healing space. And its objective would be it's a global initiative dedicated to developing spiritual intelligence, strengthening moral resilience, and cultivating emotional and physical well-being. Thank you.